there's this tendency to sort of invent these Latin heretics create these dichotomies. And this goes back long before Romanides, long before the Slavophiles, long before the influx of evangelical converts into Orthodoxy 30 years ago, who really, because they were good at evangelism, they became very good at developing these sort of apologetics, these anti-Western diatribes in their apologetics, because that's what they were good at as evangelicals. So you start with them, you go back to Romanides, then the Slavophiles, but we can go all the way back 1,000 years to these Byzantine lists.
Well, hey everyone, what is up? Welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Austin, and this is Gospel Simplicity, a place where we seek to bring simplicity out of theological and historical complexity. Today, we're talking about a really exciting topic to me. I probably say that a lot because I get to pick what videos I make, right? And they're exciting to me, but I think it's going to be exciting to you as well. Today, we are talking about the Western Rite in the Orthodox Church. Now, you might think, wait, but the Orthodox Church is Eastern, and they don't like the West, a Western Rite. Well, we're going to answer those questions. We're going to talk about what it looks like to have a Western liturgy in an Orthodox church and how that might actually help the church and how it's a thing that's actually already happening. So there's a lot to talk about. We talk about caricatures of the West that exist in the East and so much more. So I think you're going to enjoy it. I hope you stick around for the video. Big thanks to Father Patrick Cardine for making this possible. Well, also, I have to thank my Patreon subscribers and merch buyers who allow this channel to keep going and growing, especially my patrons who give monthly out of their great generosity to support me and this channel. I am so thankful to them, and if you want to support this channel to see more videos and see more conversations like this, you can go to patreon.com/gospelsimplicity, and if you do that, you'll get all types of fun perks like free merch like this, and you'll be getting exclusive access to academic content. You'll be getting ad-free videos so you don't have to hear me pitch Patreon in there and all of that good stuff. So again, patreon.com/gospelsimplicity. And real quick before we get to the video, I do want to have a word from one of our sponsors today, Christ-Centered Capital, and then we'll be to the video. If you're anything like me, you might have this vague sense that you should be investing, or maybe you actively want to invest, but you just find the whole thing a little confusing. I've been there. I totally get that. Between wondering what should you buy and where should you invest, which companies do you pick and when do you pick them, and on top of all of that, how do you know that your money isn't going to be supporting companies that are against your moral values? To be honest, it's all very complex, but that is where Christ-Centered Capital comes in, C3. C3 is an organization that exists to help you not only be a good steward of your money and be able to invest wisely by giving you timely stock picks, mock portfolios, even alternative investing opportunities like crypto and all of that and so much more, but they do it in a way that gives you ratings of these companies based on what they are supporting and whether or not they would line up with Christian moral convictions. It's amazing, so helpful, and allows you to take that investing to a more conscious level and see, is this really something that I would want to be supporting? I highly recommend you check them out, and you can do so by going to christcenteredcapital.com. And if you do, be sure to use the promo code C3Austin for your first month absolutely free. You don't even have to pay anything. You can see if you like it, see what kind of services they offer you. After that, it would be $7 per month. And just so you know, 50% of those profits will be going back into Christian organizations like pro-life organizations, Christian colleges, and much, much more. They're a great organization that I'm so happy to be partnering with. And again, I'd encourage you to check them out at christcenteredcapital.com and use the promo code C3Austin to get your first month free. Well, today I am joined by Father Patrick Cardine. Father Patrick Cardine is pastor of St. Patrick Orthodox Church in Bealton, Virginia, and administrator of the Orthodox West. Born in 1967 and raised in a devout evangelical home, he began asking questions about historical Christianity in 1985 and serendipitously stumbled onto Orthodoxy through reading Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. 21 years later, he and a group of 43 souls were received into the Orthodox Church by Bishop Thomas of the Antiochian Archdiocese in Warrenton, Virginia. Father Patrick and his wife have 5 daughters and 1 son, and quite interestingly to me, I thought, Father Patrick is also a master blacksmith, a man of many skills. Father Patrick, I'm very excited to have you on today. Thank you so much for coming on the channel.
Austin, thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here, and anyway, thank you again for having me on.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Super excited to be doing this today. And today we're going to be talking about Western Rite Orthodoxy, which I think for a lot of my listeners might be something they're not entirely familiar with. If I can use myself as a gauge for them. They're probably smarter and more informed than I am. But if I'd be so bold to do that, I don't know a whole lot about it. So I was really excited to do this interview, and I think a lot of people are going to learn a lot of things. I know for many people, myself included, Eastern is kind of like the default adjective that is used to describe the Orthodox Church. It's the Eastern Orthodox Church, and it does things in, well, an Eastern way. I think they, like myself, might be surprised to hear that Western Rite is even a thing. So before we kind of dive into the details of it and some of the granularity, just at like a broad level, what is Western Rite Orthodoxy?
Okay, that's a great question. I mean, you're right. Everybody, when they think of the Orthodox Church, they refer to the Eastern Orthodox Church. It is the adjective that's used. It probably shouldn't be, but it is. And I mean, that's the reality of the situation. I describe myself as an Eastern Orthodox priest, even though I'm serving the Western Rite, because that's the concrete reality. I'm in the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's identified as such. It looks Eastern. Across the board. My bishop is an Eastern Orthodox bishop. He's not a Western Rite bishop. So that's the truth of it. But I do serve the Western Rite. And I think maybe to start off with, it would be helpful to even clarify the term Western Rite Orthodoxy. And I know you're just learning about this, so I'm not sort of correcting you. It's just an opportunity to think about that way of putting it. I would actually say there's no such thing as Western Rite Orthodoxy, properly understood. And the term, which is what a lot of people would use that term, but it could be a little confusing. The Orthodox Church understands herself to be the Catholic Church, as described in the Nicene Creed. So the church founded on the apostles, the hierarchical, sacramental, mystical, concrete, incarnational, that church that has always existed. We understand ourselves in that way, as does the Roman Catholic Church. So as that church, as described in the Creed, we've always had, the church has always had various liturgical rites, numerous liturgical rites going back to the very earliest days in both the East and the West. In fact, and I think this is, people seem to be confused about this in modern times. It was a hallmark of the church as the kingdom of God among the nations around the world that she never had one single homogeneous rite or even liturgical culture. There's no such thing as a Christian culture. There are many Christian cultures that are unique to their time and place. And I think it's really important when we start talking about the Western Rite. It really lies at the foundation of sort of opening an Orthodox person's, making it acceptable to even envision a Western Rite within Orthodoxy. In the East, you have the liturgies of St. James, St. Basil, St. Mark, St. John Chrysostom, among others. A lot of people are surprised to learn that in Antioch, the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom wasn't done in Antioch until the 12th century, I believe. It was a liturgy of St. James. People are really shocked to learn that. In the West, you had a whole family of liturgies as well. You have the Mozabaric in Spain, the Gallican in southern France, Gaul, Ambrosian for St. Ambrose in Milan, the Sarum Rite in Britain, and what we do, the Gregorian Rite, which is named for St. Gregory the Great, or the Dialogus, as he's known in the Eastern Church. So you had a whole family of rites, and these are still done more or less. But as things go with any organization, things get centralized, and you have the two imperial cities, Rome in the west, Constantinople in the east. And as the organization of the church gets more and more centralized, and they sort of, then the rites that were done in Rome and Constantinople became the dominant rites, which is the rite of St. Gregory in Rome and the rite of St. John Chrysostom, or the Constantinopolitan rite in the east. So they became dominant, but these other rites are still done. And at any rate, So the point is there's no Western Rite Orthodoxy. There's just Orthodoxy, which is, we would say is the Catholic faith, the Catholic Orthodox faith. And it has various rites and always has. And we happen to have been given permission to serve the ancient Western rites that belong to the Orthodox Church, we feel. And I can, I'm sure you'll ask a little bit about the history, how that came about, but the patriarchs and the bishops and the hierarchy of the church deemed that it was wise and prudent and a good thing for the Orthodox Church to rehabilitate this Western Rite, which had been lost to it for some time. So we're kind of in a very concrete, practical, non-abstract way, we're an Eastern Orthodox parish serving the Western Rite.
All right, I think that's a helpful kind of line of demarcation there. So there is one Orthodox Church. It's not as though there is, the Western Rite Orthodox Church is kind of like a rival Orthodox Church, which the language might lead to. But there's the Orthodox Church and Orthodox, parishes that happen to serve the Western Rite. Am I on better footing there as far as terminologically?
Exactly.
All right.
Well, you
awesome.
just said in 7 seconds, but it took me 4 minutes to say, but yes.
Oh no, well, you gave so much more information, and I think that's really helpful. My job is to just translate at times for the people and for myself. In regurgitating it, I get to learn myself, and that's the joy of getting to do this. So for those that are curious, I think even maybe some Orthodox converts and certainly non-Orthodox, like I said, might not even have an idea that this exists, that there are Orthodox parishes that serve the Western Rite. And so for people that are now just becoming aware of this, what is kind of the rough scope of this in the U.S.? Are there many parishes that are serving the Western Rite, or is this relatively small? I think that just might help people kind of get an idea of, okay, this thing exists that I didn't know exists. How big of a thing have I been overlooking?
Sure. It's pretty small. I think just Antioch and Rocor have Western Rite jurisdictions, and between the two of us, I'm just guessing there might be 50 parishes, but it's growing. I get contacted, weekly, bi-weekly, by people who are interested in trying to become Western Rite from all over the world, actually. So you had asked about the United States, but there's a growing interest worldwide, especially in Russia, Romania, Poland, Europe. But in America, like I just heard this week, we just received 2 more missions. We have a lot of people inquiring about becoming Orthodox through the Western Rite, but it's difficult. Sometimes they don't have a priest. It's difficult to plant missions. So it takes time, takes education, a lot of preparation. So it's small, but it's growing, and there seems to be a fair amount of enthusiasm for it. There are people I've befriended online from around the country who write to me regularly and say, is there any chance there's going to be a mission started in Kentucky, of all places? There's a lot of people in Kentucky who want a Western Rite parish. And we just say, we're, by God's will, and your prayers, hopefully we'll be able to get something started there at some point. So but maybe about 50 parishes.
Okay, that's helpful to know as I, kind of begin to get my hands around this thing that we're talking about here. So if I were to walk into a Western Rite an Orthodox parish serving the Western Rite, there you have it. So I've been to many Catholic churches. I've been to a few Orthodox churches. Where would I think I am? Would it feel like I'm in a traditional Orthodox parish, but the flow of the liturgy is a little different? Or so you kind of get what I'm getting at here. So maybe in terms of aesthetic and liturgy, how different might this be than, say, the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom?
It's quite different. It's quite different. It's quite the same. So just to be a little enigmatic about it, I have cradle Orthodox people that come and they just think they're right at home in the Orthodox Church, because it's got the spirit of Orthodoxy is there. It feels Orthodox, but liturgically, the actual prayers, the vestments, the colors, the architecture, maybe, they look very Western. It's all very Western. So another thing people are a little bit confused about, because they're familiar with the way that Roman Catholicism has gone since Vatican II, and with modern Anglicanism, and the liturgical, expression that you see in most typical Catholic churches and Anglican churches. They don't realize that the Western liturgical tradition was extremely conservative up until the 1960s. So you just have to go back to 1958, and you find a liturgy that St. Gregory the Great would have recognized. Basically, he would have known everything that was going on, essentially, in the Tridentine, what's essentially the Tridentine Mass, which is not a major shift from the Gregorian liturgy. It was just a codification. That's all it was. A lot of people are misunderstanding that as well. It's not that there weren't some ceremonial developments. Certainly there were, but it's essentially all recognizable to him. So it's very conservative. So that's the liturgy that we do. I mean, you'd think you were in a 50s Roman Catholic church, except it's in the vernacular, it's English. There's a lot of congregational participation. We sing some hymns, which they might not have sung. And the parishioners are not there doing private devotions like they might have been doing in the 1850s. They're participating, robustly in the liturgy. So that's what it would look like, I mean, it would look very similar, but it would feel maybe a little different.
It's no secret that today, perhaps more than ever, people are struggling with their mental health. I think if I asked you all to virtually raise your hand and said, hey, are you currently struggling? Do you consistently struggle with mental health, be it anxiety, depression, or whatever? I think many of us, myself included, would raise our hand and say, yeah, like things get hard sometimes, and sometimes it feels like more than we can handle. But the problem is, despite facing these difficult circumstances and dealing with these mental health crises at times, so few of us end up actually getting the help that we need. It might be because it can take so long to get into a counselor or therapist, or you think it's going to be too much, or maybe there's this thought in the back of your head that Christians aren't allowed to have mental health problems. And does that mean there's something wrong with me? Well, from the beginning of my channel, far before it had any type of reach or influence, I have wanted to do my part to help end that stigma. That's why one of my first videos I ever made was titled, "You Can Have Jesus and a Therapist Too," hoping that would give people the permission to go out and get the help they need without being worried about these shameful stigmas that people have attached to it. Well, now I am so excited to be partnering with Faithful Counseling, who are leading the charge in helping people get the help they need. Rather than having to wait months to get into a counselor, if you sign up for Faithful Counseling, you can be paired with a counselor in 24 hours or less. I don't know if you've ever attempted to do something like this through traditional avenues, but if you have, you know just how crazy it is to be able to pair up with someone that quickly. All of their counselors are licensed and have over 3,000 hours of experience. You can connect with them in flexible ways. You can do video sessions, phone calls, private messaging. It is really fantastic. They even have a live chat. It is such an amazing service. I'm so excited to be partnering with them, and I'd really encourage you to check them out. You're going to faithfulcounseling.com/gospelsimplicity. If you do so, you'll get 10% off your first month, and I think it will be really, really helpful for you. Now, I do want to say that this isn't a crisis line, and if you are experiencing suicidal thoughts or ideation, I would encourage you so much to not go through this alone, but to reach out to a crisis line. I'll put one on the screen here. But if you are looking for mental health help, I think Faithful Counseling could be great for you. They will connect you with a Christian counselor, and I know people come to my channel from a variety of backgrounds. So if you want one specifically from your Christian denomination, they will work with you to try to make that happen so that you can get Christian mental health help. I think it's going to be fantastic for you. I can't wait for you to check it out. Again, that's faithfulcounseling.com/gospelsimplicity. You get 10% off your first month. After that, it will be $260 per month, but there is financial aid available for those who qualify. Once again, guys, don't hesitate to get the help you need. faithfulcounseling.com/gospelsimplicity. All right, that's helpful. And I've actually been able to attend some very traditional Latin Mass services here in the city. And so I think I might have maybe something of a touch point for what you're describing of that kind of pre-1960s Roman Catholic Mass there. I think just one question out of curiosity. I know I've gotten a little bit off of our outline here, but I think people might be curious about the liturgy itself. Something that I instantly associate with Orthodoxy, fairly or unfairly, is iconography. When I walk into an Orthodox church, I expect to see icons everywhere, more or less. Something that I just readily associate with Orthodoxy, but not something I would necessarily associate with pre-Vatican II Catholic Church. Not that they'd necessarily be against icons, but it's just not the general aesthetic of Roman Catholic Church. Within an Orthodox parish serving the Western Rite, would you still have kind of a robust iconography, or would you have more of the kind of religious art, whether in statues or other forms? Does that make sense?
Sure. So first of all, not to at any rate, icons don't mean paintings. So another misnomer, I know that I'm not trying to correct you, but a lot of people don't understand. There's a lot of misinformation about some of these things, even among Orthodox people. Icons don't mean exclusively paintings. They mean any kind of artistic representation, which could be three-dimensional statuary, bas relief, mosaics, or painting on wood or something else. So the canons are very, nebulous about what an icon. Well, they're not nebulous, but they definitely don't mean painting. So a lot of people misunderstand that. There was statuary in Constantinople. There was statuary in the East. There's still plenty of statuary, not a lot, but there's statuary used in the Eastern Rite Byzantine Church in various places. Russia, for example, there's miracle working statues in Eastern Orthodoxy. And perhaps the reason we don't see very much statuary in the East is because it was easier to destroy when the Muslims came, the Turks came in, and they were destroying things. The second sort of misconception is that iconography in the West, if you go to Italy, the best preserved Byzantine icons in the world exist in Italy, not in the East. They were destroyed in the East. So if you go to Italy, they're all over the place. The churches are just plastered with frescoes, sometimes just covered from floor to ceiling. So it's not uncommon at all in the West to have Byzantine style iconography, later Romanesque style iconography in terms of painting, in Italian churches and German churches in France, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of crossover there. But to get to the spirit of your question, which, the spirit of your question is, yes, we would have as many icons as we could afford. We're building a new church. When we built the church that we're in, we knew that it wasn't going to be our permanent nave and temple and altar area. So we didn't spring for, $150,000, iconography project. But we would like to have more icons in our church than we do. And so, but we also use statuary as well. And we don't draw a distinction between painted icons or iconography in 3-dimension.
That's helpful. And I think what this interview is going to do for a lot of people, and I think it's going to be a great service to my audience and to myself, is to help kind of nuance some of the maybe easy dichotomies that we draw between the East and West that maybe don't actually hold up in actuality. So I'm excited for that. I'm always excited to learn, and I hope people learn a lot as they do this. One kind of final background question as we begin to move, or before we move into maybe like the necessity for the Western, for serving the Western Rite in Orthodox parishes, at least in some capacity, is just a bit of the history. So you mentioned that I believe it was only Rocor and Antiochian currently offer the Western Rite, and that there was a decision by the bishops that this would be a good thing in those cases. Could you walk me through a bit of how that happened? When was it that it was decided that, hey, we need to have parishes have the option of serving the liturgy of Gregory the Great or these Western rites? How did that come about?
Sure. Okay, let's see. I mean, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this, but I guess you could trim some out if I get too much detail, more than you're looking for. But I'll try and go through sort of maybe a brief overview of history of the Western Rite. So Saint Cyril and Methodius, 9th century, Moravia, Dalmatia, they are the first ones that we know of to begin to say the Latin Rite, the liturgy of Saint Gregory, in the vernacular, in Slavonic. And they were working off of, this actual same liturgy that they were using in Slavonic was being done somewhere up until the 1970s. It's my understanding, which is fascinating. Maybe not in canonical orthodoxy. Another thing, there was a Benedictine monastery on Mount Athos that was established in 985, and it was there through the 14th century. And this was not a minor monastery; it was a major monastery. It was a ruling house on Mount Athos. I'm just giving you some background of sort of like crossover between Western and Eastern Rite within Orthodoxy that people might not be familiar with, might find it interesting. There's also, and I've seen a lecture on this. There are still about 60 churches in Cyprus. They're not being used in this way. There were 60 churches, but the buildings still exist in Cyprus, where they have a dual altar right next to each other. There's a wall going down between the two sanctuaries, and they're kind of both domed. And there's a Latin Rite altar and an Eastern Rite altar. And both liturgies were being done in these Orthodox churches in Cyprus for many years. I don't know when the cutoff, when they ceased being done, but those churches still exist there. At any rate, there's a lot more crossover than people might imagine. But to get to sort of more of our modern, semi-modern times, in 1865, there was a fellow by the name of Overbeck. He was a Catholic priest, and he converted to Orthodoxy in London. And he wanted, he was Orthodox, but he wanted to see if it would be possible to retain the Western liturgy that he was familiar with. So he approached the Russian hierarchy at the church in St. Petersburg and asked if he could continue using the Roman Missal and Breviary and Rituale. And in 1869, the synod there in Petersburg agreed to allow him to continue using. So this goes back to the 1860s. In 1879, Overbeck went to Constantinople seeking the same permission that he got from Moscow. And the ecumenical patriarch, Joachim III, and there was a synod there in Constantinople. They reviewed everything, and they basically approved the use of the Latin liturgy and the Benedictine offices. We pray the Benedictine hours of prayer at our parish. So we went back to England, and he started this project of trying to vivify and rehabilitate a Western Rite within Orthodoxy. He met some opposition by Anglicans there, and they pretty much kind of made it impossible for him to get any traction with this project. So he died in 1905, and he never really saw much come of his efforts in his lifetime, but it was his work that laid the foundation for what was going to come later. In the same time, though, that he was at work in the 1890s, there was a priest, Father Joseph René Villate. He asked to be received into the Orthodox Church by Bishop Vladimir, who was the representative of the Russian Church in the United States. And he was received into the church. He was an old Catholic and connected with the Episcopalians. And the Episcopalian bishop denounced him. And what's important about this is that the Russian bishop came out with a public statement. I won't read it to you, but it was a long public statement saying he's Orthodox, he's ours, leave him alone. We affirm, his canonical status, and we have approved his right to use the Western liturgies. So that's very, very interesting. He used the Overbeck liturgy that he had put together, but he did it in the vernacular, in English. So there was another bishop in 1892 who helped start another Western Rite parish, and from some other people. Anyway, there was all these starts and stops like this, and there were people developing. There was a Western Rite diocese in Czechoslovakia that was established in 1898. Bishop Gorodz, who became a saint, and we commemorate him on our calendar, was originally received as at the head of a Western Rite Orthodox diocese there. In 1926, there was a group of Orthodox churches approved for Western Rite in Poland. as well. So there was some work in Poland. In France, there was 1,500 Orthodox people received in France, all Western Rite. It's quite well known that Bishop Maximovich, Saint John Maximovich, was served the Western Rite, consecrated Western Rite bishops in France. He's a very beloved bishop. In 1904 in America, there were some Episcopalians that approached Saint Hallowini, Raphael Hallowini's part of our Antiochian Archdiocese, and he was working with the Russians. He was working with Saint Tikhon, who became the Patriarch of Moscow, very well-known saint of the church, and they asked if they could become Orthodox and retain their Western liturgical traditions. Saint Tikhon took this request back to the Moscow Synod, and the Moscow Synod reviewed all of this and approved. They approved for use these Western Rite liturgies with some slight modifications. 1911, there was another major sort of bishop that came into the Western Rite, and the Patriarch of Alexandria recognized the Western Rite at that point. So we've got patriarchs, Antioch, Moscow, Alexandria, all approving and recognizing the Western Rite. In 1922, Metropolitan Gerasimus came to America, and he brought his deacon with him, Anthony Bashir, which is important because Metropolitan Anthony Bashir, his deacon, became the Metropolitan of the Antiochian Church in America. And he really became the one who sort of opened the door for the growth of the Western Rite in America, was Anthony Bashir. And in 1958 it sort of became formalized. He wrote back to Antioch. Antioch said, go for it. We approve this. They also wrote to Constantinople and said, we've approved this, trying to get, as many patriarchates on board as possible. And there were several other sort of developments that I won't go into. We have a couple of nice articles on our website, orthodoxwest.com, which is our vicariate website, which I run. But if you want to go on there and read a little bit more in detail about the history. But at any rate, there was in 1958, I'll just skip kind of ahead a little bit, Patriarch Alexander III of Antioch told Metropolitan Anthony Bashir to welcome the parishes, these Western Rite parishes, into the Archdiocese. He sent a letter to the Russian Synod saying, please take the same action that we've taken. And there was a Western Rite edict issued a little bit later that year and formally establishing the Western Rite vicariate within the Antiochian Archdiocese. And so that's when it began to really grow. Our parish came in about 2006, so 15-ish years ago. And there were about 8 churches that came in right after us that were part of our former communion. But it's been growing with starts and stops, all through this time. There's more information, but that kind of gives you maybe a real brief overview.
Yeah, I think that's a very helpful overview, and I think some of the big highlights there are just the stature or the weight of some of the people that have approved this, right? There's patriarchs approving this and bishops. It's kind of some like upstart thing, and that's happened on the sides, but it's had good canonical footing for some time now, and I think
saints.
Yes.
There's been 3 or 4 saints who recognize saints, maybe more than that have not only recognized it, approved it, but energetically supported it and tried to make it grow.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be huge for a lot of people listening, so I appreciate that history. I think that's going to be helpful, and like you said, I'll leave a link to your website in the description if people want to check out more, whether about the history or some of the things we'll get into here, because actually, in my next question, I'd like to reference an article that you wrote, that you sent me. I forget the precise title of the article, that's my apologies, but in this article, you paint a picture of kind of these east-west or relationships for many Orthodox Christians, as well by sharing some of your own story, but and how it worked out in your life. And you write that you learned to despise the West at the same time you were learning to love the faith of the Eastern Orthodox Church. The commensurate relationship between scorn for the West and love for the East was no happenstance, nor was it unique to your experience. You were taught to scorn by the same ones teaching you to love. Tell me, where do you think this comes from? Because I see this so often in my channel that I think my channel attracts a lot of converts to whether Orthodoxy or Roman Catholicism, and when they get into that new ecclesial setting, it seems like they look back on what they see as like the other side, and there's no redeeming qualities. Or I get a lot of Eastern Orthodox converts who all of a sudden anything Western, even if it's like not even like ecclesial related, can seem defaultly bad. So it seems like at least some of that is part of your story, and you see it in others. What do you think is causing that?
Well, it's not an abstract theory what's causing it. It's a very concrete, real thing. So it's the apologetic materials that have been produced are laced with an anti-Western sentiment. That's what's causing it. So it's and it plays on a certain, I mean, you could go into a sociological, psychological sort of like study of why that is so successful, which it is rather successful. To define ourselves by what we're not, or in opposition to the other side, or maybe people are trying to flee something, or they've got baggage, or it's just easier to sort of like all or nothing, make it clean. Or if they hear a hymn that they had in their past church and they have some sort of like emotional trauma, it's easier not to hear that hymn anymore and just say it's bad. So there's all kinds of maybe psychological, emotional reasons why this is so successful. Well, I wouldn't say so successful. I'm actually going to challenge that idea that it's so successful and eventually in this conversation. But on some level, it has been successful to use an anti-Western rhetoric, polemic, sentiment in our apologetics for why people should be Orthodox. So a lot of the apologetic material in Orthodoxy to try and convince people why they should become Orthodox, which is awesome. It's great. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of evangelical efforts being done by the Orthodox Church, which I think is fantastic. But a lot of it is laced with this sort of anti-Western sentiment, which the people that wrote this material, they were taught this. This is what they received. So they're just sort of like passing along. They weren't critical about this. They received it, they accepted it. Maybe they didn't think very deeply about it because it was just sort of it was kind of axiomatic about the West. It had become axiomatic in Orthodoxy. And so they put it in their books, and it's all a part of the material that is read and digested by potential converts and then converts to Orthodoxy. And they sort of make this a part of their story. And I have a lot of books on our bookshelf. We have our parishes, they read a lot. And I tell people that come to catechism, I say all these books, almost all the books on our bookshelf need to be redacted. Like they need to be blacklined. And I'm just upfront about that, right? At first class in catechism. And a lot of the authors of those books are friends of mine, like really good friends of mine, and really wonderful priests, very intelligent and very good people. But there's things in there that I think that are not helpful and maybe even a little misleading. So there's a reason why there's this anti-Western sort of mentality and sentiment. And it's because what people have digested. Now, if we go back to what lies behind that, I can go back. There was both in the Greek sector and in the Russian sector. There's a reason for these materials that were written, which have developed sort of this anti-Western sentiment. I'm going to do really sort of like oversimplified gloss on this, but on the Greek side, the Turks were in control of Asia Minor there, and Greece, and a lot of Western Latin and liturgical language. They brought that back, Greeks incorporated into their catechisms and their teaching materials. And there was a group of young Greek theologians who felt like this had really sort of like tainted orthodoxy for them. And they took it upon themselves that they needed to liberate orthodoxy from this sort of Western influence. And this just goes, this is 20th century. This doesn't go a long way back. So a lot of the things that were written, were written as late as by these theologians were developed, in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And they really, really sort of got this, I hope I don't get in trouble for this. This is just my opinion. This part's my opinion. Sort of a messiah complex, that we're going to liberate orthodoxy from this negative Western influence. And, my hypothesis is that in order to liberate the Orthodox Church, we've got to cut this Western influence off at the knees, which basically means Augustine. So Augustine was kind of vilified in a lot of these writings, and in my opinion, slandered. And that's where you get all this anti-Augustine stuff that you read a lot of times now, is from this attempt to undermine Western influence by undermining the one who is seen as the sort of the singular pillar of Western Christianity, which is Saint Augustine. Now that is a very, an oversimplification, but maybe helpful. In the Russian side, you had Peter the Great bringing Jesuits in to teach in the schools. Everything was taught in Latin. Again, you had this Latin influence in Russia. And when you had the Slavophiles fleeing Russia, going to France and then America, they too had a vision for maybe getting back to more pure patristic orthodoxy and liberating orthodoxy from this Western captivity. And so a lot of their writings, those were the ones, that was my bread and butter, was all the Slavophile writings. That's what I digested for years myself before I became Orthodox. But their writings are all laced with kind of like trying to liberate orthodoxy from Western categories, Western influence. I think among the Slavophiles, it's a little bit more complex than among Romanides and Azakul and some of the Greeks. They were a bit more, in my opinion, vitrolic about it. I think the Slavophiles were more nuanced in these things. And a lot of these Russian theologians were actually having a lot of ecumenical talks and dialogue with the West. So they weren't quite as vitrolic about it and so black and white. But still, their writings still project that there are certain Western Christian ideas, theological, liturgical, whatever, that are not Orthodox at root. And these things carried through their writings, they were digested by a lot of converts, and then they just get repeated like they're axiomatic. I could just give you one example. I don't want to go down this rabbit trail right now, but Losky wrote about Anselm, for example, and really misrepresent. And Losky's a giant in 20th century Orthodox theology, a giant. I mean, I devoured his works, but he just got it wrong about Anselm. And basically, his word on Anselm in the mystical theology of the Orthodox Church, it just misrepresents Anselm. But it's become axiomatic for Orthodox converts. For all Orthodox, they just take it for granted that what Losky said about Anselm was accurate, and it's not. So you'd be hard pressed to find one in 1,000 Orthodox Christians who would know any different. Of course, nobody's ever read Anselm. You wonder if Losky's read Anselm, honestly, or if he's just repeating something. But that's an example, a real live example. Another really important example is Romanides with Augustine's original sin. Completely misrepresents Augustine's teaching on original sin. Augustine never taught that we inherit personal guilt for Adam's sin in the garden. In fact, Augustine goes to great lengths to explain that that's not what he's teaching. So that is almost ubiquitous in Orthodox catechisms around the world, this idea that Augustine taught this about original sin. And it needs to be corrected because it's created a lot of problems, actually. Those are two examples. I'll give you a third, Aquinas, because I know you may ask me about the three boogeymen, and it's just convenient. Their names all start with A, and they all sort of land historically in a nice, tidy way. But Augustine, Anselm, and Aquinas. Aquinas is derided as sort of this is the fruit of Augustine. We have it in Aquinas. He's a philosopher, not a theologian, and he's just all syllogisms instead of mystery, and instead of experience, he's just scholasticism. What a lot of Orthodox don't know is that Aquinas was translated into Greek, and when he was introduced into the East, he was beloved. I mean, they thought he was amazing. Scholaris, a saint of the Eastern Church, who was no friend of the West. I mean, he didn't, mess around, and when it was called for, he criticized the Western Church, soundly. But he thought Aquinas was great. He regarded him very highly. He said there were a few problems, but there's a few problems with lots of people. And people are interested in reading more about Aquinas. There's a really good book by Orthodox scholar Marcus Plested called Orthodox Readings in Aquinas. He's a teacher at Marquette. Anyway, there's been a lot of work done in recent years to correct some of these what I would call false dichotomies between East and West, but there's still a lot of work to do. I have met many, many, many young people, especially their 20s and 30s, who are like, not just, I don't know if I should use this, they're not just swallowing all of this and taking it for granted. They're going back and actually reading the sources for themselves. They're reading the fathers, they're reading history, and they're saying, wait a minute, Anselm didn't actually teach what we're being led to believe he taught. Anselm didn't teach, the angry God, exacting his wrath on Jesus. That's conflating later Reformed teaching with Anselm. They're not the same thing. And that's not what he was teaching. And by the way, the first systematic theologian in the church, the first theologian to systematize any kind of doctrine was not a Westerner. It wasn't Anselm or Aquinas. It was St. John of Damascus. It was a Byzantine. So you're saying, the Orthodox like to go around saying, well, we don't have any systems. We don't speak in syllogisms, except St. Gregory Palamas did, as did many others. And we have no problem with organizing things, So again, there's all kinds of sort of false dichotomies like that. But the reason that people have this anti-Western bias is because it's the material that they've digested. It was the polemical, rhetorical apologia that they got when they became Orthodox. That rhetorical, polemical apologia material came from, the Slavophiles a little bit, and especially the Romanides and others and his disciples. But I would like to, unfortunately, I'd also like to point out that it doesn't stop there. You can go all the way back 1,000 years. And this might be a little controversial. This is just a working opinion, a working hypothesis. I mean, I'm just not holding this opinion tightly. I could be wrong about this, but it seems to me that this sort of tendency to vilify the other side and sort of show how they're heretical is something that is common to maybe the culture in the East. And it's not that the West didn't do it. Everybody does it. This is a human trait, a human fallacy. But it seems like the Eastern Church took this to new levels of perfection. They practically invented a whole genre of literature called the Byzantine lists, in which, there's not just one Byzantine list. It's a whole genre where they would make lists denouncing, the Latin West because their beards weren't long enough, or they fasted on Saturdays, or things like this. Some of their criticisms were more serious than others, but there's this tendency to sort of invent these Latin heretics create these dichotomies. And this goes back long before Romanides, long before the Slavophiles, long before the influx of evangelical converts into Orthodoxy 30 years ago, who really, because they were good at evangelism, they they became very good at developing these sort of apologetics, these anti-Western diatribes in their apologetics, because that's what they were good at as evangelicals. So you start with them, you go back to Romanides, then the Slavophiles, but we can go all the way back 1,000 years to these Byzantine lists. And there's been a tendency, I think it could be argued, a tendency to sort of to do this. It's in the psyche, I guess. I don't know, which is not all bad, by the way. That's not all bad. It's there is for a good reason. I kind of believe that there are general sins of cultures. You know, the West has tendencies of the Western mind, and there are both virtues, and then there is the distorted, flipped side of those virtues, which manifest in vices or sins, and likewise maybe in the East. But different cultures have tendencies in this way, and maybe the West doesn't know when to shut up. Maybe that's the sin of the Western Church. I've always said that. The problem with the Roman Catholic Church is they don't know when to stop talking, and then they end up painting themselves into corners. And the virtue of the Eastern Church is she knows when to stop trying to explain something. But the problem, I think, with the East is, which is actually a good thing, she so identifies her faith with the concrete reality of how it's manifest. What she wears, how she fasts, the liturgical tradition. There's a sacramental realism there, an existential realism in her life that is so incarnationalized. It's not abstract. It's not theoretical. It's not strictly metaphysical. It is extremely concrete and incarnational, especially in Antioch, for example, which is, I think, a brilliantly positive thing. So when she understands her faith in her fasting rules, in how she dresses, and whether she wears a beard, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a positive thing, except when she fails to realize that there are other Christian cultures who have developed other manifestations of the same faith through a different cultural expression. And culture is tied to cult, which is the liturgy. There's not just one liturgy. There are different liturgies which have different cultural, nuances. And so they manifest different culturally. And this has always been true, that there's never been one calendar in the Orthodox Church. There's never been one fasting rule in the Orthodox Church. But because the East so identifies it so locally and so immediately with her own experience, when she encounters something that's different, maybe there's a tendency to say that's not Orthodox. I don't know. Somebody could write their dissertation on this, and I think it would be quite fascinating. But I'm sort of just musing about that. But so there are reasons. Those are some of the reasons why we see this anti-Western, sentiment. A lot of it is just misinformation about actual doctrines of the atonement, about liturgical practice. We have organs in the West. Oh, we have organs aren't Orthodox. That's not true. Organs were used in the West in the 6th century. They only became, they were banned in the East because of their association with houses of ill repute. They were never banned. There's a million things like that we could talk about. Kneeling on Sundays. There's many different things. Statuary. So we could go one by different objections that people might have.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there, and I imagine going one by one would require an entire second video to get through, and maybe a third and fourth to get through all of those. I'd like to maybe highlight some of the key things, but maybe before we do that, I want to get at this question of what does the East or the Orthodox Church lose when she detaches herself from more, prototypically Western understandings or expressions of theology and liturgy? Because I can imagine someone having a couple different reactions to what you've just said. There could be the defensiveness of they want to get back into this and I don't know, is that actually true? And we could go one by one. But But I also imagine there's people that are thinking one of these two things. Either one, if the West isn't wrong, well then I'm in trouble because I've kind of built my self-understanding of being Orthodox as being not Western. Like the reason to be Orthodox is to not be Western. And I can also imagine a second person saying, okay, maybe we've gotten some things a little wrong. Maybe Losky wasn't fair to Anselm, or maybe Romanides wasn't the most charitable reader of Augustine. But like, to what extent does it matter? Is this like an academic thing? Does this actually affect the Orthodox faith? And so I'd like to maybe start with that of what does the Orthodox Church miss out on, or what does she lose when she kind of takes this approach?
Well, the liturgical tradition and patrimony of the West is not like some, old shoe we lost in the attic and we discovered and tossed it in the bin. I mean, it's part of the living tradition of the church, part of the work of the Holy Spirit. It's part of the ongoing biography of Jesus Christ. I mean, I made another film that's on our website that I give this sort of metaphor. It's like a child, a child that had been lost to its mother, and many, many, many years later, the mother goes on with life, but that child finds its mother and says, "I'm your child. I'm home. I found you." And if the mother was to say, "I've been getting along quite well without you. I don't really need you in my life anymore. I mean, I've survived without you. I'm good. I don't need you. Like, this is going to be too complicated to invite you back into the house, the home. I've got a family. You don't really belong anymore. I don't know you very well." I mean, can you imagine a more ugly response than that? So the Western patrimony, the whole patrimony, the fathers, the saints, the liturgical life, the devotional life, it is rich. It is imbued with the fire of the Holy Spirit. It is a living tradition. It's not like just some old relic. Well, even if it was an old relic, we wouldn't throw a relic away either. We'd put it in a beautiful reliquary. We'd venerate it. We would, light candles next to it. So it is a living relic. It's to be venerated and to be brought back in. So to lose all of this is to lose part of our own self. It's self-harm. It's to lose a part of our own heritage and history and living tradition. And let's say the Eastern Orthodox Church says, okay, I agree with that. I don't know of a single priest, friend of mine, who I have many, who would disagree with that. But they might say, all right, you're right. Technically, you're right. This is part of our history. It's part of living tradition. But, pastorally, it's just too complicated to bring it back in. Well, maybe we'll bring it back in, but, it's just got to kind of like exist under the radar. So basically, your daughter comes home after being gone, and you're like, well, you can live in the basement, and you can't eat with us. No meals with the family. I mean, that's not going to work either. Okay. That's not what we need. We need Father George Florovsky, one of the great theologians of the 20th century, said there is no patristic synthesis. In other words, there is no full-orbed binocular orthodoxy without the Latin fathers, without the Latin patrimony. He said that, and I agree with him. Well, there's no Latin patrimony without the liturgical life of the West. As Orthodox, it is fundamental to our understanding that we don't just read orthodoxy, we live orthodoxy, we breathe orthodoxy. And the way that we live and breathe it is through worship. It's through the offering of the sacrifice of the Mass, and it is through the liturgical tradition. So it's not enough to just start reading, St. Gregory and St. Patrick and St. Benedict and St. Ambrose and St. Jerome. It's not enough to just read their works and St. Augustine. It has to be a part of our existential life and experience of God. So it requires a liturgical rehabilitation of the Western liturgy. So we lose also, this is going to be interesting, we lose a certain theological perspective. We need 4 Gospels. Why do we need 4 Gospels? Why isn't one Gospel enough? These 4 Gospels, the Holy Spirit decided we needed 4 Gospels. Because these 4 Gospels give us different sort of perspectives of the gospel. We're looking at the gospel through a different prism, of the different lens. And we need those different perspectives to have a binocular vision of the gospel. Well, the Western liturgical tradition presents in its prayers, ceremonies, in its rites, it presents the work of Christ, the salvific atoning work of Christ, differently than the Byzantine liturgy does. It's not the same. The Byzantine liturgy does not actually focus on Christ as mediator, hardly at all. He's Christ's Pantocrator, up in the heavens. In the Western liturgy, there's a much, much stronger focus on Christ as mediator, as the God-man. So this is not right or wrong, better or worse, but it fills out our perspectives on the mystery of salvation and the work of Christ. So there's all kinds of complementary theological perspective that we get from the Western tradition. And like I said, it's really not going to be a part of an Orthodox life if it's not a part of our liturgical experience. It's not just enough to have some classes at St. Vlad's, and Holy Cross on the Western Fathers. That's not sufficient. That's not even Orthodox way to think. So that's not going to work. It has to be liturgical. We lose a relationship with the Western saints. I heard that the Russian church just recently added St. Patrick to their calendar. I was aghast. I didn't know this. St. Patrick isn't on the Russian calendar? How's this possible? So we lose this relationship, because we ask for their intercessions and their prayers, and they show up and we keep their feast days. We lose this relationship with all of these Western saints. We lose credibility. We lose credibility to and an opportunity for a fair hearing for people who might be interested in Orthodoxy. They come, they see what they perceive as a cultural ghetto. They see what they perceive as a disinterest in anything that's not Eastern, Slavic, Arabic, or Greek. And they think, oh, how can this be the Catholic faith if they're not interested in everything? And they get confused. And so for the number of people that are won over through the anti-Western polemics, I think for every convert we get using that approach, I would think there's thousands who walk away. And I don't think very many people are talking about this, but this has been my personal experience. I know personally many hundreds of people who would have become Orthodox if it hadn't been for the anti-Western stuff. And so a lot of them are hanging out in the narthex. They're not they don't want to walk away because they're so drawn and so intrigued, and they're really convinced that the teachings of the Orthodox Church, her purity of devotional life. I mean, we're still the only church that still fasts, and we don't burn our dead. Okay, that was a slight little snub at another really big church that some people are looking at when they're looking at Orthodoxy. We still fast and we don't burn our dead. And I'm just using that as sort of poetical headings for how Orthodoxy has maintained really the spirit of a serious devotional life and a seriousness to the tradition. So people see all this, they're like, man, I want that, but I can't swallow all this anti-Western stuff. And they're confused by it. A lot of people just walk away. And my argument is, for every convert you make using the anti-Western stuff, you're losing 1,000 converts. So we lose credibility. We lose the ability to really expose people to Catholic Orthodoxy. And we lose a lot of stuff by all of this.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, and I know that it resonated with me personally. This video, and I think I shared this with you, it came as a response to a bunch of comments I received on a video that I made after kind of 1 year of looking into the Orthodox Church. it's crazy for me to think, but it was only just a little over a year ago that I started getting interested in all of these questions of church history, which made me kind of confront the claims of the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox churches. And I made a video kind of reflecting on that experience, and something I said about Orthodoxy is like, yeah, I love the devotional life. I love the liturgy. I love the focus on the fathers and so many of these things. But there was a certain amount of like, it, on the one hand, it kind of felt disingenuous. Like, it seems like a prerequisite to becoming Orthodox is becoming Eastern. And like, I just simply don't really resonate with that. I don't feel Eastern at all. And I would also agree that I find some of the polemics against the West off-putting, especially as someone that's, my main area of kind of academic research has been in like the medieval West, which is kind of, both, in fairness, Protestants do the same thing with the medieval West. Like, it's the worst thing ever. And when you look into it, it's just not always the most fair characterizations given, or that the West is all rationalism when there's an entire mystical tradition in the West, or what have you. And so I've found some of those things off-putting. And so I appreciate you getting into that idea that for every one person that is, converted to Orthodoxy by these Western polemics, so many are left in the narthex. I think that was a really pretty way of describing that. So I really appreciate that. There's, I think, maybe one final-ish question before we get to the final four, the rapid-fire questions that I'd like to ask for maybe some Orthodox people who are still trying to process what's going on here. And let me say that this has been wonderful, and thank you so much for your time. I always want to make sure I'm getting that in there. I think I could imagine some people saying, whether they've built their kind of identity on this their religious identity on this anti-Western polemic, or they're just not used to hearing any Orthodox person speak highly of the West in any way. What do you say to people? I'm sure you get people asking you, like, if you think the West has a lot to give and all of this, like, well, why should I be Orthodox? Because I thought the whole thing was to not be Catholic, to have the ancient faith, but not to be Catholic. And so for people who are wondering, like, well, if this is a kind of part of it, should I be Catholic? Because the Catholic Church has been saying, let's breathe with both lungs, and kind of adopted this attitude where you could have kind of like the Eastern Rite Catholic churches. And I think a lot aren't familiar hearing anything positive about the West from someone who's Orthodox. So despite thinking there's a lot that the West gives and that the East needs this Western patrimony, what would you say to those people who say, well, then why be Orthodox?
Well, let me start with a little analogy. Yeah, we play along. You have to play along. Okay, so you have two glasses of water, and one glass is completely pure and clean. The other glass is like mostly just sludge. Which glass do you drink out of?
Pure and clean.
Okay. Second scenario. Two glasses of water. One is completely pure and clean. The other glass is almost all clean, but you notice floating on the very top of the glass is just a little fleck of something. We'll just call it very unpleasant. So, okay. Which glass do you drink out of?
Still the pure and clean.
Was the second decision any more difficult than the first decision?
I mean, maybe slightly, but not really. I mean, you just picked the pure and clean one, it seems.
Yeah, so probably no. I mean, like, you weren't really tempted to drink the glass with a speck of feces floating on the top. No,
it's very easy.
Glass, you're going to drink the pure and clean glass. So I think that a lot of people who are trying to explain why people should be Orthodox and not Roman Catholic, they're using the first scenario. Their arguments are according to the first scenario. I happen to believe that the reality is closer to the second scenario. But it is no more difficult for me to make the decision to be Orthodox and not Catholic in the second scenario as it is in the first. I don't need to make up reasons not to be Catholic. I have a few, and they're solid. I really only need one. I mean, I have more than one, but I only need one. I don't have a single reason not to be Orthodox. I did have a reason, but it went away. So I have something to say to those people in the narthex who are bothered by the things that they're bothered by. I have an answer for that I found personally. It's my personal answer, and I've used it with a lot of people, and our church has exploded I think, in part because of this answer. But I could get to that in just a minute. But the reason I'm not Catholic is because it's not the pure and clean glass, and we could go into the reasons. I mean, it's the papal issues, it's the treasury of merits. I'll say real quick, we believe in merits, but we don't believe in the treasury of merits. There's a difference. It's things about purgatory. So there's some doctrinal stuff, there's some pastoral stuff, but I would say maybe at the top of the list is they don't fast and they burn their dead. And again, I'm using that sort of kind of it's both a literal problem, but it's also sort of metaphoric for having not consistently held to the tradition of the church in terms of the liturgical and devotional life. And for Orthodox, your liturgical life, I don't care what you got on paper. You have to be living the faith liturgically and devotionally to be a good Orthodox Christian. And so we see a real slide away from lex orandi, lex credendi est. You can't change the spirit of the liturgy or the liturgy itself, and still that's very problematic. But anyway, that's a quick answer why it doesn't sink in what I just said. They're like, oh yeah, but. I'm like, well, you didn't really think through what I just said then. I'm suggesting that you're drinking a glass of water with feces in it. I don't care how small it is. You have a choice for the one that doesn't and one that does. So my opinion, if you're going to take it seriously, you need to think it through. It's telling that people don't take the liturgy. They don't understand the importance of the liturgical life. The fact that people don't take this seriously, they just sort of like, oh yeah. So they burn their dead. That is a serious problem. Serious problem. We do not burn our dead. That we should be scandalized by that. So the Orthodox Church, our bishops say if we have a parishioner and they cremate one of their beloved, I cannot do their funeral. Forbidden to do it. So this demonstrates the fact that we don't understand the seriousness of this demonstrates how far we've come from from the tradition of the church, from the true spirit of early Christianity. We've fallen very far, and we don't fast, which also is representative of things. But to get to my answer to those in the narthex, would you like me to? I don't want to run your interview for you, but.
No, go for it, by all means.
So I'll try and be quick about this. I spent 20 years trying to find apostolic Christianity. 20 years. So I grew up Baptist. So the first 3 years, I don't know, we were just looking, for whatever, apostolic Christianity. Within 3 years of that 20-year journey, I discovered Orthodoxy, and I pretty much embraced it immediately through reading the brothers Karamazov and Crime and Punishment. And I read the Crime and Punishment in one night. And I just said, this is what I'm looking for. And that sent me on a 17-year journey, talking to Orthodox priests, reading everything I get my hands on, visiting monasteries weekly. But through that journey, I began to wrestle. I was very anti-Western for the first 5, maybe 10 years, very anti-Western. I tell people I was the most anti-Western SOB you ever met in your life. I mean, I was like, I took the cake, and I was an evangelist too. So I really developed my own sort of apologetic rhetoric against everything Western. But I went through a conversion experience that I like to think was prompted by the Holy Spirit. And then I followed up with that sort of conviction that I was in the wrong with more in-depth study about theology and Orthodox theology in the West. At any rate, what I still couldn't get over the reality of becoming Orthodox meant becoming Russian for me at the time, because it was mostly the Russian church I was interested in. And that really was the reality. I mean, I know Orthodox priests who are trying to make American Eastern Orthodox churches and trying to make them as enculturated as they can. And they like to say, well, you don't have to be Russian, but really, you kind of do. I mean, there's a certain extent where the liturgy, the cult of the liturgy shapes the culture. and you have a liturgical culture, and that's your life, and you can try and be as American as you can, but you're going to be in a different cultural milieu than, American. And that is the reality. And I think priests need to stop like pretending that's not true. And they just need to tell people right up front that if you find this a little weird, it's because it's a little weird. They need to just tell people that. So, well, we're getting to my answer. So I couldn't become Orthodox because of this. I couldn't resolve. I go to these priests, Orthodox priests, and say, why do I have to be Russian to be Orthodox? And they would respond with a very clear, concise, and well-developed reason for why it was good and right for me to be Eastern in order to participate in the Catholic faith. Why do I have to be Russian to be part of the Catholic faith? This is why it's good and right. This went on for 12 years. 12 years, maybe more. I never bought it. I was like, I'm not very smart, just a country boy, not educated, but I don't know, this doesn't make sense to me. I ain't buying this. So I go home, read some more, cry myself to sleep, because this was a lot of angst going on over this. Finally, not one person told me the right answer. Not one. I'm friends with all these priests now. I give them a pretty hard time about this. Not one of them gave me the right answer. So I was left to wrestle this out over a decade on my own until finally I realized what the right answer was. My mistake was, during that time, I was letting them establish the premise for answering the question. And the premise was, I'm going to try and come up with the best answer for convincing you why it's good and right that you have to become Russian to be part of the Catholic faith. So their answers weren't working for me. So I was trying to come up with an answer for why it was good and right. You see the premise of the answer? It took me 12 years to figure out there was the wrong premise. So I was never going to get to the right answer for why it was good and right, because the answer is it's not right and good. The answer why I have to become Russian, and I actually didn't have to become Russian because I got to be a Western Rite priest, but the answer why most people have to become Russian or Greek or whatever is because of sin. Not because it's good and right, but because of sin. The sin of the schism. You see, I was trying to come up with this abstract philosophical rationale, sort of an abstraction, a theory for why it was good and right, when in truth, it was the accidents of history. It was just, this is the way things shook out. There was a schism, which was the most terrible, horrific, terrible thing that's ever happened in 2,000 years of Christian history, was this breach between East and West. It fell along geographic lines, cultural lines, and basically the East got it more right than the West did, as far as Orthodox people are concerned. I grew up in a Western country. The Orthodox Church is here. We get exposed to it. It's sort of culturally foreign, but we come to the belief that this is the pure apostolic faith maintained, and we want a part of it. And so, why do I have to become Russian? Just because of that. So the answer for me was, it's not right, but I have to do it anyway. So there's all kinds of things in this life that are not right and not good. But your soul was never supposed to leave your body, but it does. So Jesus came and died and rose again to fix it all, but it's still bad that your soul leaves your body. It's still bad. My Pentecostal grandmother, she loved God. She was a saintly woman. I believe she's saved. But she says, well, if I can know Jesus and be saved and not be Orthodox, then obviously I shouldn't be Orthodox. I'm like, no, you can, but it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it good. Just because something can be a certain way doesn't make it right and good. So basically, when I realized that if I wanted the fullness of the faith in the Orthodox Church, that essentially I just had to suck it up and be Russian. That's the answer. So if you're upset that you have to kind of like enter into this weird situation, you should be upset. If you're not upset, you should be upset. Like, you should be upset about this. Now, a lot of people love it. A lot of people are not upset because they don't like it. A lot of people just love the Eastern Rite. They love having pierogi festivals, or whatever it is. And I love it too. Actually, personally, I love all the ethnic stuff. So that had nothing to do with my issues or even why I became Western Rite. I became Western Rite because it was the most orthodox thing I could do, but that's a whole nother video. Um, but my answer to these people is it is the church, it is the pure apostolic faith. And if you want that, then it's going to come with some things that maybe you're not too excited about. And I agree that you're justified in not being excited about that, but that's the accidents of history. That's because of the sin of the schism, and that's just the way things are. So if you want it, you're just going to have to deal with the reality of that and make the most of it. And really what ends up happening is you experience God wherever you are and you learn to love it. A lot of people love it immediately. This is not true. A lot of people out there listening, they're like, well, I loved it the first day I went. I did too. But there are plenty of people who don't. There are plenty of people who feel like they're LARPing, right? Or something like that, or it's weird. I can understand how they feel that way. But I think if they understand the historical context, it would help them to mitigate those feelings. They could learn how to cope with it.
Yeah, I appreciate all of that. And I really appreciate you sharing some of your story and the kind of existential angst that these questions can bring. They're no small questions. And it's interesting to me how it came down to kind of realizing that there was a false premise in there, that the answer wasn't, or the question isn't necessarily why you had to become Orthodox or why it was right, or sorry, why it was good and right for you to become Russian. But that you shouldn't have to, but in the accidents of history, these things shook out the way they did. I appreciate kind of the realism with that and also the pastoral care for maybe people that are there in that narthex. Well, Father Patrick, this has been a joy. We have got to cover a lot of ground, and I'm sure that people watching will think, even though we covered so much ground, there's so much more they would like to see covered, and I would direct them to your blog, which I will leave in the link down below, the Orthodox West. I'll have the correct link down there for that. But this was a real joy. Thank you so much for your time today. I'd like to close with a little section that I do in all my videos called the Final Four, where it kind of just gives people the opportunity to get to know the person being interviewed a little more on a personal level, as a lot of the questions that tend to come up on this channel can be a bit cerebral and maybe a bit detached from their everyday lives. So the first question is, what has been the most fruitful habit or spiritual discipline in your life?
Praying the Benedictine office without even a close second.
All right. Outside the Bible, what has been the most impactful book on your life?
The Brothers Karamazov.
I like it. You're having coffee with yourself right before becoming a priest. What's one piece of advice you give him for his future in ministry?
Never forsake your prayer rule and learn patience and humility.
Great advice. Final question. This channel is called Gospel Simplicity, and it's often pointed out the conversations can be a bit on the complex side. So I always like to kind of bring it back at the end here to this question of, in one sentence or so, what is the gospel?
I could have 10 different sentences that I'd feel comfortable with, all 10, but I'll give you one. Jesus Christ, who is Lord, has defeated Satan, sin, and death, and opened the path for man to become fully human by being Christified, united to God.
Wonderful answer. Father Patrick, thank you again so much. And thanks to all of you who watch this sometime in the future. I know that I do not take your time lightly, and I'm so, so grateful that you would spend the last hour or so with us, and I hope you learned a lot today. Until the next time, be sure to be on the lookout for more videos, but far more importantly than that, go out and love God and love others, because truly, above all else, that will change the world.